everybody, and welcome to The Watch Inquiry, a journalistic look into the watch world past, present and future, with me, Tim Barber.
And me, Chris Hall.
This episode is the first in a two-parter where we're asking the question, what are the most game-changing watches of the last 15 years? Chris, we thought it would be a fun little exercise to look back over the period since 2010. We're recording this in late 2025, by the way, and to think about the watches that have had the biggest impact in that time, in our opinions anyway. And it's a period when we've really seen the transformation of luxury watch consumption into a much more visible and mainstream activity. But it's also pretty much the period you and I have been in the watch game as journalists.
That's right.
And my first Baselworld, I think, was 2009. When was yours?
Yeah, I came to SIHH in Geneva in the January of 2011.
Right.
A couple of years behind you. And yeah, I think a bit of a theme that's going to run throughout this podcast series is a sense of a retrospective of that time.
Yeah.
For you and I, because this experience has been a chance to take stock a little bit of what we've done and seen, but also I think we both noticed that there's a tendency to quite quickly forget what's gone maybe more than 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think the industry itself has gone through these different chapters, and in a way, when you and I came into this, it was just at the beginning of a new chapter. So in the early 2000s, you have the kind of the re-blossoming of the luxury watch industry. That began in the 90s, obviously.
Right.
But then in 2008, 2009, you have the crash, which then almost destroys the watch industry all over again. And then things very quickly picked up, largely because you and I obviously came into the industry, started talking about watches, and
I think a great deal of credit should be ascribed to us.
Well done, us.
Yep.
Well done. So we thought we'd look at that period and think about what are the watches that have had the most impact in really deciding what direction the watch industry has gone in over that time.
Yeah.
And there's 11 watches in total, so we're splitting this into two episodes to make it a bit more digestible. So part 2 should be available right now as you get this as well. Let's briefly talk about what's not in, because there are some slightly probably surprising watches that we decided not to include. So there's no Lange and Söhne.
No Lange, not at all.
There's no Vacheron, and there's no Jaeger-LeCoultre.
No
GG.
Yeah.
Probably because those are brands that tend to have more of a kind of a body of work over this period rather than a specific watch that we consider to be revolutionary or game-changing during that time.
I think that's fair, and I think you could say the same of Cartier over the same period.
Yeah.
There were quite a few prominent indie watchmakers.
Yeah. Caravage-Leinen, De Bethune. You know, and I mean, some of these came close, I have to say, F. Pigeon. But again, we hopefully for reasons that will become obvious, there are ones that we just felt had more of the sort of the leading impactful watches at the time.
Yeah, there are watches that I think have massively changed perceptions of what watch design can be. They've massively changed the fortunes of the brands that created them, and some of them have really introduced a new way of thinking about this industry, this world.
Okay, well, let's dive into the first one then. So, 2010, Rafa Nadal steps onto the tennis court at Roland Garros wearing a watch. Relatively unusual for somebody to actually be wearing a watch while they were playing, and this was a £500,000 or so tourbillon from Richard Mille.
Incredible.
Incredibly cheap by Richard Mille standards today. I mean, can you imagine? Just $500,000. And it was the RM27, and it was just about the lightest watch ever made at the time. I think it was a game changer because it changed the way we think about lightness. It changed the way we think about engineering and watches, kind of what a high piece of watchmaking can really be. Mm-hmm. I remember I actually went to Roland Garros a few years later and had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Nadal very briefly, and
he was wearing his watch.
He was wearing it, and I tried it on. And it was like wearing a piece of paper on your wrist.
My goodness.
You couldn't feel it.
So it's the fact that this is a technological step forward for Richard Mille, because the aesthetic had existed for a while, right? And the shape had been introduced, but we feel that for Richard Mille, this is the watch that pushed things on to the next level.
So this is the watch that really cemented the idea of what Richard Mille is. It's the watch that made lightweight a really interesting category within watches. So you have, it wasn't the first lightweight watch, there was titanium watches for a long time before this,
right,
and other materials, but it's the watch that really inverted this idea of heavyweight materials, meaning the top end of luxury, and instead you have something that is, you can barely feel it, and yet it's a tourbillon. It's not just a watch, it's a tourbillon. So it's a piece of high horology made to be worn on your wrist while playing tennis, or as Nadal said, like a second skin. So it was in the classic Richard Mille barrel-shaped case, sort of curving case shape, made of carbon fiber, and it weighed less than 20 grams, including its strap. The movement. So the base plate is made from this alloy of titanium and lithium, a lithium alloy containing copper, aluminium, magnesium, and zirconium.
Okay, because it's worth remembering that maybe that is something we've become so used to as well. This, absolute rifling of the periodic table didn't happen as much back then.
So Richard Mille would say it's something that they were going through the world of Formula One. And anything that was done in Formula One or
aerospace or all of that,
they would drag this stuff out. And again, we're pretty used to this stuff now, but it was very unusual then. And the watch was just unbelievably light, and it was the sort of the modern take on the idea of sports luxe that comes from the 70s.
Okay, yeah.
Properly sporty, incredibly luxurious.
And this has got everything that it's right at the heart of that Richard Mille Venn diagram, right? You've got the star power of a huge global sports star. You've got that visibility. You've got those mechanics, the engineering, the look, the shape, the extreme, as you say, extreme aesthetic that he started to pioneer. I can totally see why you think this is one of those significant watches of the last 15 years.
All right, moving on.
I'm going to take us from that to another smaller independent watch company, little-known consortium called Max Busser and Friends.
Okay.
Now, MB&F, as everyone will doubtless remember, launched in 2007 with the HM1. So that was all about a sort of new vision of avant-garde steampunk watch design. These guys, Urwerk and others, came on the scene and really sort of showed the old guys what was what, right? And
freaky watches, and also this kind of idea of collaboration.
Yeah, being so much more open about that.
Yeah,
totally. But then in 2012, it switches tack and brings out Legacy Machine 1, which is a new spin on traditional watchmaking. They say these are the watches MB&F would have made 100 years ago. We've got a sort of perfectly circular case. It's round.
That was a head spinner in itself.
It's crazy how quickly they could set that up as a radical idea, having only very recently made their name as disruptors with crazy shaped watches, to then go, aha, but now we do round, and everyone goes, oh, that's genius. Oh, that's amazing, well done. But it really was a curveball from them at the time, because it's not just traditional watchmaking as we've known and loved it. It's a completely new take on it. You've got this swooping, arched sort of V-shape bridge that holds the flying balance wheel. You've got a vertical power reserve. You've got these two glossy, milky dials side by side, and this big dome of sapphire that covers the whole thing. And these all became design flourishes that we associate with MB&F ever since. Right? And this introduced that, and it also, I think, it showed just an incredible ability to merge their way of doing things with proper watchmaking tradition.
It was, in some ways, an MB&F that you could imagine actually wearing. And obviously, lots of people wore MB&F watches, but if you were not so inclined towards that kind of design, the Legacy Machine suddenly made a completely new kind of MB&F that you could wear, but you could still see this kind of mad world of imagination and incredible craft.
Yeah.
And it really put the craft side of it forwards, because this wasn't kind of dazzled out by the sci-fi design.
No, this really lived on the strength of, I suppose you would say, the strength that any traditional classical fine watch should live on. It was the finishing, the quality was right there to see. The movement is made by Jean-François Maujean from Chronode and Kari Voutilainen together. It's like an all-star cast of sort of horological talent, and it was all there on display to see. And obviously it really quickly became the second pillar of what MB&F is as a brand.
I think it made MB&F the brand it is today. And as much as it had already had frogs and spaceships and all these kind of things, it showed that there was a depth to what Max could come up with, and that it had other places to go. And there were the clocks and robots and things as well. But it showed that there was really more to this than simply trying to do something that was a sculpture for the wrist.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And obviously they're a brand. It's a brand that's been able to successfully hold together quite a broad spectrum of product, which isn't always easy. But yeah, you're dead right. This is the line that ties MB&F to sort of the great horological tradition.
Yeah, and I think up to this point, they probably were to some degree challengers. They were
disruptors.
Purveyors. They were disruptors, novelty, and suddenly this shows that they can still be all of that while doing something that has a sense of history to it.
Yeah,
and we have to remember, they were still a small concern within the industry at this time. I mean, they had GPHGs, I think, and
this won the GPHG that year.
Which prize did it win? I'd forgotten that.
And actually, it won 2 awards. It won the Best Men's Watch prize and the public vote as well.
Yeah, back then there was actually a public vote as well. I think we've scotched that in the meantime.
And so many other things I think stem from this. You know, for me, without the LM series, I don't think you necessarily have the popularity of Ferdinand Berthoud or a host of other independent watchmakers like Remy Coules, Simon Brett, Sylvain Pinault,
that's interesting,
etc. I think they all sort of indirectly or otherwise owe a little bit of something to what the LM series did. And it's also, I think, fair to say that the LM line, just as you were saying for MB&F, it made them the brand they were. It provided their bedrock for old school horological innovation, if you like. If the horological machines took daring steps in terms of movement, layout, configuration, and sort of design sculptures, it was within the LM family that they brought out this incredible perpetual calendar and the LM Evo chronograph later on. And this was where I think MB&F did perhaps its most serious work.
When we were discussing which watches we were going to put on this list, we actually did think potentially it was going to be the LM Perpetual rather than the
I think there's
LM1,
a really strong case for it.
because the Perpetual is the pinnacle of perpetual calendars in many ways. It's probably going to be, if any of them is MB&F's gift to posterity, you might think it's going to be the Perpetual. But on the other hand, the original LM is the one that sets the platform for these kind of things that could not have been done within the spaceships and robots and things that were part of the horological machines.
That's how I see it. I think you could talk all day about the genius of Stephen McDonnell and what the LM Perpetual did and how incredibly well made it was. But honestly, I think for game-changing status, it's the LM1 for me.
Yeah, I think I agree. Okay, let's go to a break, and when we come back, I think we'll be discussing what's possibly the most impactful watch on the list. Okay, see you in a minute.
People say there's no such thing as honest watch journalism. They say you can't trust the reviews. They even say there are subjects watch journalists won't go near, that they're scared of talking about what really matters. Maybe they've never heard of The Fourth Wheel, the weekly independent newsletter that explains, analyses, sometimes laughs at the world of watches. With no hidden agenda or outside influence, it's the place to go to understand what's really happening in the watch industry. Google The Fourth Wheel to find the full newsletter and subscribe today. You'll get original, in-depth writing in your inbox every Friday. The Fourth Wheel, honest about watches.
What is the watch, Chris, that you think that we've spoken about and written about more than any others since we've been
Oh,
in the industry?
That's a top question. I think I know where you're going with this. It's so tempting to give a silly answer, but I know what the real answer is, isn't it? Go on.
Well, yeah, let's talk about the watch that under one name, there's probably something like 427 different iterations. We're going to 2012 and the introduction of the Heritage Black Bay by Tudor, or the Black Bay as it is now known. Eventually the word heritage disappeared.
It fell away, didn't it?
Fell away.
Yeah.
And the Black Bay really is the watch. It feels, looking back now, like it did come out of nowhere. It didn't, but it was the watch that changed the mainstream of the watch industry in such a big way. I think it's fair to say.
It's crazy to think how little thought of Tudor was prior to this and where it is now.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
insane.
Tudor, I remember looking at Tudor's website back in 2008, 2009. It was little more than a kind of a portal with these watches that were, I mean, they really did look like knockoff Rolexes, and they were being sold in Asia at the time. They weren't in Western markets. It was barely a going concern. It just didn't really exist. And then suddenly someone had the idea that with, I think, Rolex at the time going up in value, that its little brother sibling brand could be more than it was, I suppose, where it had been in the past.
It hadn't been away for as long as people think, had it? But it had been long enough in some markets that it was pretty dormant.
And it certainly wasn't spoken of. You know, it felt like a dormant brand. Anyway, it's tempting to look back at it and go, it starts with the Black Bay, because the Black Bay is the one that has stuck like a limpet to Tudor's brand, to the watch industry. I mean, in some ways,
It's
you can say
become the brand.
it has become the brand. There are other Tudor watches.
I think.
And some designs have come and gone. Yeah, could you name them?
Hey, the Pelagos just might be the best watch Tudor
All right.
makes.
That's very true.
Right.
But go back a couple of years before, when the project of bringing Tudor back begins. So in 2010, you have the start of the Heritage collection with the launch of the Heritage chronograph, which was
Right.
the revival of their 1970s chronograph watches, known as the Monte Carlo and the home plate. Both, interestingly, very colourful graphic designs that were just fantastic.
I love them.
With these lovely stripy NATO straps. And that was the beginning of the association of Heritage Tudor watches with NATO straps, which in itself became a major trend in the industry. The return of the NATO strap with a sort of a sense of style. And
I mean, so much so that it very quickly became its own in-joke, didn't it? You know, get it on a stripy NATO. Everything will look better on a NATO.
Everything looks better on NATO. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that came in 2010. The following year came the Fast Rider, the motorcycling style chronograph. It didn't stick around for long.
It rode off pretty fast.
It rode off. And in the same year, 2011, you had the Advisor, or the Heritage Advisor, which was the relaunch of the alarm watch, which again was a fairly niche proposition, but actually it was rather lovely at the time. So we knew that that things were afoot, and all these watches were kind of under the project that was being led from a conceptual point of view by a man called Davide Cerato, previously worked at Panerai. Davide was very much the peacock of the watch industry at the time.
Careful.
He'd show up in a bowler hat and an Italian suit or a Savile suit, and was really tasked with bringing some pep and style into these watches. And then in 2012 came the Black Bay. So this is inspired by the Submariners, both Tudor and Rolex Submariners, their diving watches in the 60s and 70s, in particular this famous Snowflake hour hand. But rather than simply trying to bring back a heritage model as they had with the chronographs and with the Advisor, it was synthesizing a sense of the past with something that could feel modern as well.
That was smart, wasn't it? Because by not tying it to a particular reference from their catalogue, in one stroke, it gave themselves license to do whatever they wanted, But at the same time, yeah, as you say, they created a mood board, if you like, of heritage dive watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was more interesting.
It was a genius move was launching it with a crimson bezel, which you'd never obviously seen on anything with the word Submariner attached to it.
Sure.
But the very first model had the crimson bezel. We've had blue bezels, black bezels, bronze versions, everything since. But the red bezel and the gilt dial markings at the time really set the template for this being something of style. And then suddenly we saw brands everywhere dropping vintage style dive watches, colourful bezels.
Oh my God, it was unstoppable.
Yeah, I think you had RS Diver 65 is very much a post Black Bay watch.
Yep.
Longines Legend Diver, even something like the Polaris from Jaeger-LeCoultre. It's a post Black Bay dive watch, I think. And brands like Zodiac and Doxa.
I think it 100% made the market for those watches to exist.
The other thing is it made the market for Tudor as a brand on the move, and it is now a linchpin of the mainstream watch market. And of course you have, at the same time, the Pelagos that came out the same year. They launched the Black Bay and the Pelagos at the same time.
Right.
The hardcore dive watch also has the snowflake hand, also has the ripples of a sense of those historic watches, but is fundamentally your proper diving watch. Whereas the Black Bay is very much has that sense that you'd wear it with a suit. You could and you would.
But you can't forget that it came at a price that was incredibly attractive, and its build quality was superb.
Yeah.
It is incredibly rock solid just to handle and to wear. It's well made. And I think we don't consider ourselves the only barometer by which these things should be judged, but almost I'd say upwards of 50% of all watch writers bought into the Black Bay. I've got one, you've got one, most people we know have got one or have one. And I think when everyone like that puts their own money down and says, yes, please, that tells its own story as well.
No, it's an undoubted design classic within the watch industry. And it's so strange because it's absolutely formulaic in some ways, and yet it managed to do something at the right moment that has enabled it to stick around and really redefine that formula. And the dive watch took over from the chronograph as the mainstream sports watch.
Yep.
There is one more thing I have to say about the Black Bay. It was one of the watches that I really remember where they engaged the collector community as a way of reaching a mainstream audience. And so Tudor really, unlike Rolex, who didn't engage its community at all,
sure,
Tudor really went after the vintage guys, the guys who loved their old Submariners, the people who, after all, at the time were getting vintage Submariners and putting them on cool leather straps or NATOs and dressing them up. And Tudor went after that community, collaborated with them, got it interested in the history, created almost or helped build a new mythology around the vintage Tudor dive watches. And from that, they were able to fan out into the mainstream.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. And if you're a brand now that looks to sort of make its mark, that's your sort of marketing playbook 101.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I suppose it's in some ways it was nothing that Panerai hadn't done with the Panaristi, and of course Davide was at Panerai before he was at Tudor, so there may have been that learning. But I think the fact that it was Tudor, and of course by extension Rolex, did make it feel very fresh, and I think it revealed the viability of connecting with the collector base in that way that really was game-changing. Okay, Black Bay done and dusted. Where next, Chris?
All right, so let's go from that to another watch, which I think anybody listening will be thinking must be on this list of game changers in the last 15 years. The Bulgari Octo Finissimo Tourbillon, which came out in 2014.
Okay, not 2012, I think, because this was, I think, the starting point for Finissimo, and I'm fairly certain they celebrated 10 years of the Finissimo in 2022, no?
Well, this is confusing because the 2022 10-year limited edition anniversary special did come out in 2022. I think that there was some mix-up between that, not on Bulgari's part necessarily, but it was received perhaps as a 10-year anniversary of the Octo Finissimo. Mm-hmm. I think we're looking back at the launch of the Octo Solo Tempo.
Oh, so
in 2012.
The polishing up of the Octo as a watch.
Yes, because the Octo Finissimo has been so successful that it's far outshadowed its parent, if you like, the sort of full fat Octo, the regular sized mainstream steel sports watch Octo.
Oh, so which has now gone anyway. So we now only have skimmed and semi-skimmed. As the Octo Roma is the semi-skimmed, because the Octo was around for Bulgari in the earlier days under sort of emerging from the Gerald Genta brand, and then in 2012 they completely changed it to make the Octo the sort of the heart of the mainstream.
Yeah, they gave it a refresh.
They took the Gerald Genta name off it, which was the crucial thing in 2012 as well.
Yep. And in hindsight, that's another extremely interesting sort of narrative to follow through. But then what we're sort of focusing on is 2 years later, the Octo Finissimo as a concept debuted with the tourbillon reference in platinum on a alligator strap. And this was, at the time, it was seen as, you have the Octo, we've done a thinner version.
Was it the thinnest tourbillon or the thinnest watch?
The Octo Finissimo tourbillon was 5 millimeters thick, which in the context of what we, again, have seen since, seems positively supersized. But it was an extremely thin watch. And if you ask me, this watch reinvigorated interest in ultra-thin watchmaking anyway, as sort of as a horological pursuit.
It created a competition because Piaget had that category almost to itself.
Yeah, I think it started a bit of a tennis match between Piaget and Bulgari, where they would knock backwards and forwards and score record-breaking achievements one year after the other.
The idea of anybody else other than Piaget having a record for thinness was a bit surprising and quite funny. It was Piaget have been caught napping by Bulgari. How did that happen?
A little bit. And of course, we know that now, then further down the line, they were both taken by surprise by Richard Mille. But to come back to the Finissimo tourbillon, it's not the watch everybody sort of summons to mind when they think of the Octo Finissimo, because I think the automatic from 2017 became the archetype of what Octo Finissimo watchmaking is. And that's partly because it came in the titanium, that grey on grey with that slinky bracelet. To begin with, platinum and alligator. This was a different kettle of fish, but it's where Octo Finissimo starts. And that's why I think it's so significant.
Yeah. I think when the tourbillon came out, it felt like one of those, not necessarily one-off, but a kind of a concept piece, the sort of thing that you would never see outside award ceremonies or very particular autologerie circumstances. It was that special. It was that elevated. The automatic that came in 2017, the surprise was showing that this could be mainstream. It wasn't that expensive for what it was. It was £11,000, I think, something like that. And, with a micro rotor, the thinnest ever automatic watch, in titanium with this cool grey dial. And it was kind of, the funny thing is actually with the tourbillon as well, it was a watch that was as much about design as it was about mechanics. It was a mechanical marvel, but it wasn't shouting about the mechanics. It was a work of design.
100%. I think Fabrizio Buonamassa did an astonishingly good job in achieving those two outcomes side by side. I think it was he's the creative director at Bulgari Watchmaking. He's sort of the man whose penmanship is literally visible on later editions, the sketch editions. He is the person who has put Bulgari Watchmaking on the map, and this is his finest work.
I think along with Davide Cerato, who we were just talking about, he's one of the principal wearers of a well-cut suit in the watch industry.
For sure.
I remember him turning up with the titanium automatic in 2017. He had this wonderful window check suit on that he was wearing with a denim shirt and a knitted tie and this grey matte ultra thin titanium watch on his wrist, and it just looked so cool. It looked so perfect in a way that we hadn't seen. It was it felt completely new. It really did. And
Yeah.
even though it was the beginning of the bracelet trend, it just felt new.
It was terrific, and it showed an aesthetic side that I think others have since learned from it in its use of sandblasted finishing, daring to not necessarily be polished where you would expect that to be.
Also, it was such a ridiculous idea to make to make the Octo the watch that you were going to flatten them. It was like they'd taken the Octo of 2012 and put it under a rolling pin. The case is stepped and faceted in multiple ways. There's so many facets and sculptural elements of that case that you would think that you couldn't do that. Didn't we? We once did an interview with the guy who was responsible for machining those cases back in the QP days, who was explaining how when they had come out with this design and this, well, yeah, but we can't make that. It's too difficult. So it was as a work of machining, it's kind of crazy and absurd.
Yeah.
And then the idea that you take something as eccentric as that and build an entire collection and keep breaking thinness records.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, the minute repeater, the chronograph, the skeleton, another tourbillon, the ultra pieces. When the sort of record-breaking tussle really heated up, then things went even further, and you start to get down to sub 2 millimeter case thicknesses. And to add to what you were just saying about the design, I think the Octo Finissimo, for all that it obviously has a lineage to the Octo, and from there backwards further to Gerald Genta, I think the Finissimo is the watch that put Bulgari watchmaking on the map in its own right without having to trade off Genta's name.
No, even though it was basically still the Genta Roth resources that had enabled them to do that.
Yeah, sure. But people, for the first time, they weren't talking about it in that context.
People were outraged when they took the Genta name off in 2012. By the time of the Finissimo versions 1, 2, and 3, they'd forgotten all about it.
Yeah.
Bulgari watchmaking was away because it had managed to synthesize a new sense of design. And there's a really interesting contrast in terms of the Black Bay that we were just talking about, which generates something new out of all of these historical codes.
Yeah.
And then you have the Octo Finissimo that's making something new entirely, in a way. It's playing into the wider category of sports luxe, of bracelet watches. But the design codes feel very fresh, and that's why I think we both felt that it's just, of all the watches that have emerged in this time and brought a new sense of style and aesthetics, that one's head and shoulders out in front.
Yeah, for me too. Absolutely.
All right, so Chris, we're going to go from that design classic to probably, if I had to pick one watch that I thought was the most handsome, beautifully designed with the finest font I've seen in watches, I would not pick this one.
You're not wrong, and yet it is one of our game changers. Okay, so the year after the Octo Finissimo Tourbillon came out.
So we're talking 2015?
We're in 2015, and we are with Omega.
Okay.
We're with Omega, as we both were literally, for the launch of the Globemaster annual calendar. And plenty of people will be sort of furrowing their brows at this and holding a
what the hell is
blinking
the
second.
Globemaster annual calendar?
Well, of course, the Globemaster is the successor to the Constellation with its pie pan dial. That's a reference to a 60s, I'm pretty sure.
Very stylish. Dress watches of the past.
Yeah, a dressy, sporty.
A very particular kind of look.
But none of that is what we're interested in here today.
Okay.
The Globemaster annual calendar brought to the world stage the Master Chronometer Caliber and a certain thing called a METAS certified watch.
METAS.
Wake up!
Oh,
Stay here.
Do tell me all about that. Can you tell me something about Gauss as well while
I
you're about
will.
it?
You're going to get Gauss.
How many Gauss? What's Gauss?
I'm going to Gauss you until it hurts. This is different. This is an odd one out on this list, but honestly, it changed the game, and here's why. Away from hype watches and Hollywood stars and hip-hop collabs, as this is one of the biggest watchmakers in the world, taking a massive forward step in terms of actual watchmaking quality. Measurable, definable, certified, externally validated. proper what I know. Calm yourself. But honestly, if this isn't what we're all here for at the end of the day, right? You've got to actually make watches that do a decent job of telling the time, haven't you? Side note, maybe. But this was Omega. It was a no bullshit leap forward. Of course, it marketed the hell out of it and have ever since, but it has signified, it signaled Omega's ambition. The master chronometer label now applies across, I'm pretty sure in saying it applies to every watch Omega makes, right? It eventually, obviously and significantly, made it to the Speedmaster Moonwatch Professional in 2021. That was a moment for Speedmaster sort of nerds, but the Globemaster's the watch that they chose to introduce it with, and that's obviously perhaps in hindsight a curious decision.
I remember you used to get the marketing and PR people at Omega would say, "Please, can you talk more about METAS? We really need to explain the whole METAS thing." And you'd go, "Well, why did you launch it in such a strange, oddball watch? And also, it's hardly the most memorable name. Nothing about METAS really sticks in the mind. And yet, it's one of the things it launches, again, another kind of competition around accuracy and reliability. So you have the master chronometer from Omega and superlative chronometer from Rolex. And there's a kind of a toss-up between which is more advanced.
Well, another little arms race was begun, you know, and of course the grounds for argument can't ever be particularly aligned. So Omega will certify from 0 and +5 seconds a day. And Rolex will do -2 +2. And you go, oh, which is better? Because one's a 4-second bandwidth and one will never lose time. It'll only ever gain it. And so on and so on and so on. And back and forth they went. And METAS certifies a watch to a degree of magnetic resistance. Here's your Gauss. Okay, 15,000 Gauss.
Yeah,
which
I really need that all the time.
Well, the point is not whether you need it all the time. You don't need it any more than you need your 100-meter water resistance walking down the street. But it signaled to me an ambition to take on the challenges of what mass production watchmaking was about. And I think, honestly, you're being scornful because it's dry as kindling, but honestly, it's important. I think it's at the heart of a really sort of, I would say, concerted and consistent effort from Omega to continually make more impressive watches.
I think one of the things you can say with Omega, going back to, let's say, Seamasters in the 1950s and the movements it was making then, it was highly advanced. They're some of the best movements in a watch that's ever been made, quite frankly. And I think that's, whatever you say about Omega, it is making probably bang for buck the best mechanical watches there are in terms of quality, and METAS symbolizes that.
You could go around on that with a couple of pints for sure, and especially since the amount of bucks in question has recently gone up by quite a bit.
Well, that's that is the other side of that.
But I fundamentally don't disagree, and that's why I'm putting it forward for the list.
No, I think that Omega has been going through this process since the coaxial of upgrade, of change, obviously going to entirely in-house movements, and the adoption of METAS. It codified excellence, and it set the benchmark in that sense for other brands to start pulling themselves up behind, because of course Omega's owner, Swatch Group, was at the same time telling the industry that it didn't want to sell ETA movements to them anymore.
Right.
There's not just been this blossoming of movement, and some more in-house than others, but there has been a continual sort of upward journey of what we think the benchmark for a movement should be. If you bring out a movement now with a couple of days power reserve, so you are not in the game. You know,
Sure.
It's got to be 3, 4, 5 days as a minimum. It's got to be accurate. It's got to have much longer warranties. That's the other kind of really important thing about this stuff, is that, you know, you're no longer getting watches that need servicing every 3 or 4 years, but the timescales are getting much longer. So the whole sense of watchmaking, not as this static, antiquated discipline, but as something that continues to evolve in beneficial ways, not just theoretical accuracy that you're never going to really notice, is crucial. And Metas is really at the heart of that, even though at the time you would kind of go, God, how am I going to write another thing about this, let alone end up talking about it on a podcast 10 years hence.
And yet here we are, and there it is.
There it is indeed. And where we are actually is at the end of part 1 of our Game Changers episode. So thanks very much indeed for listening, and please do join us immediately for part 2. See you there.